Hello, friends, and welcome to the August 12th edition of Weekly Witness. And I am here today with Matt Lohmeier from the San Antonio Region Justice for Our Neighbors, JFON, based out of San Antonio. And Matt, thank you so much for joining us for the conversation.
My pleasure.
So first of all, for those who aren't familiar, why don't you just talk to us about the services that Justice for Our Neighbors provides?
Okay. Well, San Antonio Region Justice for Our Neighbors is part of a network that began back in 1996, and it was a response. The longer history is that United Methodist Committee on Relief had been involved in the refugee resettlement programs and helping people to make their way to the United States and to find a hopefully a welcoming community, and leveraging churches and all of that. But in the mid-90s, it became apparent that there needed to be some specialization in immigration legal services, and so they sort of gave birth in Northern Virginia to the first JFON, which is actually called Just Neighbors. And since that time, especially in the last several years, the network has grown significantly. We now have, I think, 19 JFONs in the network. Hawaii is even a new JFON site. And it is, Justice for Our Neighbors is intended to provide immigration legal services, advocacy, and really create, that buffer again between the churches who are hopefully providing some hospitality and the practitioners who are providing expertise and giving people hopefully access to a remedy that will get them into a more secure situation and on the path to citizenship.
And so you're based in San Antonio. Are there other JFONs in Texas?
There's a JFON in the capital area in Austin. There's a JFON in Dallas-Fort Worth, a JFON in Houston, and there's also a JFON, in Tyler. It's not, it's currently kind of rebuilding itself, so it's in the process of rebuilding, but those are the main areas. And then our JFON, San Antonio Region, we've recently expanded to Corpus Christi, providing services there, and we actually have our new project managing attorney for a project along the border that he starts today in our office, actually in our office down in the Harlingen area. And with that, we hope to add 2 attorneys and ultimately 5 what will be DOJ accredited reps, people that can practice immigration law without a law license, without passing the bar. They go through a program that's accredited by the Department of Justice. They go through training, and then they are mentored by an attorney, and then they kind of practice under that attorney's license to make sure that what they're providing is top-notch legal services.
And so I'd encourage people to reach out to the JFON in their area to find out exactly what's happening in their region. But what all is the San Antonio JFON doing kind of on a day-to-day basis?
Day-to-day basis, well, so historically we started just a few years ago, and we started with focusing on family-based immigration services. And last year, we were awarded a grant to hire a removal defense attorney, and I was just speaking with our legal services director last week, and we were kind of thinking about what it is that we're doing right now. And we kind of categorized it in 3 notches. We're providing services to asylum seekers, many of whom are ending up in the MPP program. And so that puts additional challenges on providing legal services to someone who isn't even in the country.
I'm going to pause you real quick. MPP is?
MPP is the Migrant Protection Protocol, also known as Remain in Mexico. And that's people that have made their way across the border, have requested asylum, and have been brought back to Mexico to await their hearings in the processing of their case. And it puts a huge burden on any legal representative, a huge burden on that, because they really have a hard time functioning in Mexico, trying to gather information that support their case if they're kind of in limbo. Not to mention the danger of being in some of those areas. We've had some really harrowing reports about situations in Nuevo Laredo and all along the border south of that area. Or I guess, well, I'm not sure which direction that goes. The river goes in so many different directions. But so providing asylum services, providing representation to people that are pursuing asylum is a big part of what we're focusing on. But then we categorize the other two as either providing removal defense, people that are in deportation proceedings, what would have historically been called that, but now the language has changed and it's removal proceedings, or people that are at risk of being put in removal proceedings. That would have been the former family-based services, but we're kind of seeing it more as defending people before they're put in, harm's way by virtue of sort of indiscriminate policies that are not targeting people who potentially pose a threat to our country, but just targeting anybody who happens to have a certain status.
And so you're certainly working a lot in that realm. Is there anything you're doing on the advocacy side?
Well, we're collaborating with Texas Impact. We're going to be helping out with we're co-sponsoring the event at the end of this month, the Clergy Courts and Ports Advocacy Intensive, to try and to lend some kind of on-the-ground legal practitioner information, so that when pastors are going to do advocacy on the Hill, they will have some really unimaginable stories to bring out to our different representatives, and hopefully there'll be things that help to move those people to support our position.
Yeah, and so I don't know if we've had this conversation, but I actually used to serve on the General Board of Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church, and
okay. No, we haven't.
Intertwined with UMCOR, and I remember hearing about JFON a lot at that national level or global level.
Sure.
And so I know the United Methodist Church is obviously very supportive of justice for our neighbors, but I'll ask this question both in terms of United Methodists and other communities of faith. What role should local congregations be playing in the work that you're doing?
That's a great question, and I know a lot of people feel somehow disempowered from being able to do anything, but there are a lot of things that people of faith could do, people in the pews. And I'll start with, simple things like requesting information, requesting, FOIAs, which is Freedom of Information Act requests. They could ask for information about the MPP program, requesting any communication that's gone back and forth between different agencies about how this program is supposed to work, what its intent is, if in fact it is something that is intended to prevent people from being able to pursue their asylum claim. It certainly feels that way, but we want to know if there's any actual evidence that would support these assertions. There are lots of other opportunities. We're trying to develop, similar to the Courts and Ports, an immigration observation group. So that would be people of faith going in, and people of good conscience, not just people of faith, but anybody who's concerned about what's happening and wants to get better understanding, but also to be sort of a moral presence. I took a clergy person into immigration court in San Antonio. Actually, it was the juvenile court. And one of our clients, who was 8 years old, was awaiting his time before the judge. And we were there for most of all of the other clients because his was the last, or one of the last called. And it was just remarkable to see how this process was going forward, where young people without legal representation, some had attorneys, but most did not, were going before a judge with a translator there, with a prosecuting attorney from ICE, and just kind of not really fully aware of what was happening. It was surreal to watch that. And the lawyer that I brought with me was just, absolutely dismayed that this could be happening in the United States. The kids are being adjudicated without a parent present, without any guardian ad litem or any adult who's there to make sure that the kids' rights are being safeguarded. So that opportunity to actually go into court and witness what is happening via presence, we're pretty confident that everything was as amicable as it could have been, and that might have been due to the collar that my colleague was wearing. We've heard certain phenomena like that from the courts and ports, that people are on their best behavior when they see people walk in with something identifying them as clergy. So that's really an important opportunity. But you don't have to be clergy. You can be a person, who's just a person of conscience who wants to make sure that the dignity of children and adults who are the most vulnerable in our society are not being disregarded by our court system. And to say our court system, we could also be advocating for what the head judge of the immigration judges has recently been speaking about, that immigration court needs to be removed from the Department of Justice. It's an administrative court within a body that has as its purpose to enforce the law, and so it doesn't have the independence it needs to actually interpret the law and to make sure that people's rights are being safeguarded. That would be huge if people started demanding that immigration court be pulled out of the Department of Justice and placed somewhere under the judicial branch. I think that would be an outstanding request for people of faith to make. There are many other things, letter writing campaigns, the handheld letter or the handwritten letter writing campaigns that, but a lot of those are going to be dependent upon, have you actually been to the border and have you seen what's happening? Or have you been someplace where large groups of people that are in this circumstance, whether it's asylum seekers or other immigrants seeking, protection, are being violated. And so having that personal experience that then you can give testimony to, whether it's through written words or going, if you have the resources to actually, go and make your voice heard on Capitol Hill. There are a lot of things, and each and every one of them is something that will in some way improve the lot for the most vulnerable in our community.
Yeah, so you've talked about going and serving as a witness to what's happening in court, and we keep hearing stories about how that just the presence of being there in court can certainly change what happens, or change kind of the sense of justice in that courtroom. But also, like you say, that witnessing of that allows you to go tell the story in a way that's powerful, and that whether it be elected officials or people in the pews kind of see you as an expert because you've been there, you've seen it, you can tell a personal story and not just have an opinion on social media. So I guess one of the things I've heard you talk about in the past is the why people in pews should be engaged in this work. Do you want to say maybe a few words about why people should engage in this process?
Well, especially if they're in the pews, then this is our faith. Jesus was an asylum seeker when he and his family went to Egypt. They were fleeing violence, very much like what many of the families that we encounter, that we provide services for. They are fleeing violence. It is not, there's a poem on one of our last newsletter that really speaks to this question, and I'd be happy to share it with people. But it's I think the poem is called "Leaving Home" or something like that, and it really gets at the fact that this is not people. The vast majority of the people that are seeking asylum are not doing this on a lark. They're not doing this because they need a better paying job. You don't leave your home, your family, all that you know, unless you have to, unless you're being forced out. And if people have not traveled to those places or have not studied the history and don't realize that, our relationship with Central America is fraught with a whole lot of dubious activity. When we talk about the gang problem, that's a problem that the United States should take significant ownership of, because we deported people who were active gang members who had never been to the countries they were deported to. They were brought here as children. They had no kind of connections there. And they set up like they were set up in places like Los Angeles and Chicago. And they had these, they had this knowledge. This was their skill set. And it was ripe for the picking in places like El Salvador and Honduras. And they became sort of the de facto government, which is one of the interesting things. If we were going to be really honest, the people are fleeing they're fleeing instability and violence, but that instability is brought about by the fact that the government in those countries can't really govern, because you have such high problems with crime, with gang violence, with gang drug trafficking, human trafficking, all those things woven together. So we have a huge, responsibility. And then if you look at the longer history of Central America, you have support of right-wing dictators who oppressed their people. And so when you look at what's happened, especially, now you have also adding to that climate change. And so people that were subsistence farmers can't make a living in the rural communities. They can't go into the cities because it's too dangerous. It's too violent. It's, my wife and I took a group of students from Loyola on an immersion down to El Salvador back in 2002. And at that time, the kids that we were staying with explained to our students that the only real economic opportunity for them, and it seemed almost unimaginable, but every once in a while, a gang member from the city would come out to the rural area with $100 bill, and I mean $100 bill because they had already given up their currency in El Salvador to take all of the currency that had been taken out of circulation in the United States. And if you want to see where really just disgusting currency ends up, it's El Salvador. But they would come with a $100 bill, an address, and a picture, and a gun. And the opportunity was to make $100, which was an enormous amount of money to them, by going into the city, going to this address, and taking this person's life. And that was that, or going to the United States. That was what they could do to help their families survive. And if people could understand things like that, and understand just how awful a choice that is for people to have to make, they would understand that the people that are coming here are people that are making a choice to be free from that type of violence. And they're people we should want to have in our country. They're people who are the hardest working, the most morally upright people. They would certainly do a lot to enhance the moral fiber of our nation. So that's, knowing those things about the context would really enhance people's ability to speak about this. And refusing to acknowledge those things about the context is why we're, as a nation, so many people are able to just disconnect and compartmentalize and say, well, we saw last week in the raids in Mississippi, people were responding that, well, that poor little 11-year-old girl whose father was taken, well, he shouldn't have been here. So that's just what happens. And that is absolutely unacceptable for people of faith to think that it's okay, no matter what the circumstances, to destroy a family like that, to disrupt a family like that. And so people of faith have both the responsibility and the opportunity to speak their voice in concert and to make it heard. I'm just going to go on a little further here, Scott, because at the Lights for Liberty, I'll share one thing, the divestment issue. One of the big questions is, if we did not have private prison corporations that were benefiting from the detention of people who are seeking asylum and others who are being processed for removal, would we have this focus on this population? The money being made by that, and thereby being made by people who have a 401k that's, whether they know it or not, invested in those high yield corporations. That money, if it was pulled out, if people said, just like when the apartheid regime in South Africa was getting pressure from international companies and international and individual investors saying, I'm not going to put my money in a place that does business in a place like South Africa. People in the United States, especially people of faith, should be saying, I'm not going to put my money on Wall Street into any corporation that's affiliated with CoreCivic or with GEO and some of the other smaller prison corporations, because they are involved in the degradation of human beings who are the most vulnerable in our community. And that puts us in material cooperation with evil if we're benefiting from that financially. And I think if we began to push for that kind of engagement from people in the pews, that could speak volumes to people who only look at spreadsheets and dividends and things like that. But beyond that, an even bigger opportunity, I think, is, if we, and this gets into Saul Alinsky tactics, but if we surrounded if we had people of faith surround a detention center, and say, we're not gonna, we're gonna sit here, an act of civil disobedience, you're not getting in or out, we're gonna have 50 people deep all the way around until the walls of Jericho fall. I know it's a little extreme, but something extreme needs to be done, because these are extreme things that are happening to people who are just desperate to be able to, not just, desperate to breathe free, however that statement goes. So those are a few of the things. There are many more things, but really it's about being an engaged citizen.
Yeah, so speaking of engaged citizens, and maybe less extreme than having to figure out how to get 50 people surrounding detention centers. Texas Impact is coordinating the August week of action that started this week, and I think B said on the podcast last week that we like to talk about the executive branch and the person, right, sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but the policies that are being made, the policies that are being enacted, are done by Congress, by our representatives, right? And so Congress has an opportunity to act, and we have people trying to schedule district visits in every congressional district in Texas during the August recess. Is there any advice that you would give them as they moved into these congressional visits this month while Congress is home?
Well, I think one of the agreed upon goals of those visits is to ask for independent observers to be allowed to go into the detention centers. If we're going to have these facilities, we ought to make sure that they're not doing anything that in any way causes any more harm to people who are already in a vulnerable situation. So I think that would be a really important thing for people to put pressure on elected officials, and that's something that no lack of people that are willing to go into the detention centers and into some of the other facilities. It's just a matter of gaining access. When Congress people, when presidential candidates can't even get in to observe some of these private facilities, that should give us all cause for alarm. And I'm trying to think, there's a couple of other priorities. I really would urge, and this might not be with congressional representatives, but with other elected bodies, that they look at pension funds and look at where those are invested and begin that divestment process. I think one thing that I would really like to see Congress put some teeth into is, and I'm not sure how this would work out, because you have that problem when Congress passes a law that the executive branch then takes that law and gets to set, procedures and kind of water it down or strengthen it depending upon whether they agree with the law. And but one of those issues that we're seeing on a consistent basis is when a person comes across the border, they usually present themselves to border crossing anywhere but at a port of entry, or they if they cross at the port of entry, they're requesting asylum. They're very clear. This is why I've come. Situation in my home country is untenable. It's not a place that's safe for me and my family. And depending upon where they are, they get processed in a different way. And we're trying to get some rhyme or reason to different paperwork that a person might be given with information that's either helpful or in some cases seems like it's just an obfuscation of information that they need. So some standardization, and I don't know, again, if it's ultimately going to be up to the Department of Homeland Security to determine how they're going to do it. They're probably not going to change things, but there should be some pressure put on the Department of Homeland Security that anyone who crosses the border and says, I'm requesting asylum, should be processed in exactly the same way, no matter where they're going, because there should be some expectation of, well, due process. Let's throw that out there. So I would emphasize that as a huge need, because if you talk to people that are doing intakes when people have been released from border or CBP processing, they're getting all sorts of different paperwork. A lot of it is similar, but the emphasis, especially the emphasis that they're given by the particular officer when they're released, some can be pretty fear-inducing. Others, they seem to be really genuinely interested in helping this person to figure out what they need to do. But all that said, they're overwhelmed. There's no doubt about that. Largely no doubt about that. I think they could manage if they weren't being forced to deal with the backlog of people that are being held for longer than they need to be, and then held in detention, which just backs everything up. Let me think what other issues. No, there were a couple of other main things that
I'll let you buy a second to think about that while I remind people that if you go online to texasimpact.org, and B talked about this last week, if you want to go back and check last week's episode of Weekly Witness, but we published some documents that folks can take with them on those congressional visits. We have a document on texasimpact.org called the 3 Keys to Stabilizing the Southern Border, and there are several bullet points under each, but the headlines were stop the criminalization of migration, stop the separation of families and the detention of children, and make all aspects of the asylum process transparent. So you can hear all the bullet points, hear more conversation about that on last week's Weekly Witness, or go to texasimpact.org and find those handouts and read through that yourself. So, Matt, anything else you'd like to add on that piece?
Well, I can't believe I didn't remember stopping the criminalization. That's the biggest that's the biggest issue. And you've heard it on the debate stage, why that is or isn't a good idea. The bottom line is that the use of that statute to arbitrarily decide you're going to prosecute people for just crossing the border is what has put so much pain into the lives of asylum seekers, and really has put collective pain into the lives of Americans, those with a conscience and with concern for their neighbors. You can't watch what's happening at the border and not be just mortified by what's happening. I will say, I want to emphasize the financial piece of this. That to me is crucial until we have an understanding, a clear understanding, and people understand their participation in it. That's going to be an opportunity for us. But no, that's about all I can think of right now, Scott.
Okay. I won't put you on the spot unless you just feel like you have something to say about it, because it is breaking news, and we'll cover it in the weeks to come. But this morning, it was announced that the Trump administration is releasing a new regulation that could potentially dramatically cut the number of legal immigrants who are able to enter or stay here in the United States. We had an episode about this a while back, talking about the public charge. Anything you'd want to add on that front?
Well, from the first glance, it looks like they didn't pay much attention to people's concerns that were expressed during the comment period. It looks like it's largely where they wanted to start out with, and not much was modified, if anything. But for those that don't know what this issue is about, first of all, it has been happening for those who seek entry through the consular processing process. Hate to be redundant there, but if you are seeking to enter and be granted a visa from a U.S. Consulate outside of the country, they've been enforcing this already for probably well over a year. And it's ultimately, if you're going to cost the country something in some type of benefits, then they have the discretion to deny your claim, even if you have, crossed every T, met every other requirement, and this wasn't something that was something that they were, it's something that had to go through this process for those that were already inside the country and that were able to adjust status from within. But it looks like this will give not only the discretion, but my guess is there will be pressure put on people at USCIS to exercise that discretion, and there'll be some way that they're held accountable to make sure that if they can ding somebody for some cost to the society, that they will leverage that to be able to deny people the right to adjust their status to become lawful permanent residents. And this gets back to, if you're seeking to naturalize and you're in this situation, that probably would not be a good thing to do, because they may not only deny your request for naturalization, they may actually revoke your legal permanent residence status and put you into removal proceedings. I don't know that that's as far as they're going to go, but it certainly is something that I could imagine given the way things are going. Yeah, the public charge, I think most people are going to be disappointed. Most people that are advocates who were fighting hard. And, maybe it'll be another opportunity to energize people, because this also seems like it goes against our values as Americans. So more to come on that.
Yes, and we'll certainly be talking more about that as well. I wonder, this may be an unfair question, and I'm just going to go ahead and roll with it anyway. It seems like, especially for me, and I'm probably even more so for you, it seems like there are a lot of things that do seem to go against our values. And I imagine in your line of work, every day you're hearing stories that just break your heart and frustrate you. Where do you find hope in the midst of all of this? Or is there anything that gives you hope?
I need hope. Can't live without hope. I find hope in the communities that have assembled themselves and in response to all this. San Antonio, the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, is an amazing sort of self-organizing group that just started in response to the unaccompanied minor phenomenon that started back in 2014, but clearly has had to pivot with everything happening now and has done so extraordinarily well. I haven't been able to attend their monthly meetings for the last couple of months due to summer and life, but that's always a huge source of consolation. And sort of a secondary to that, I was able to attend a meeting out in Del Rio where they were beginning to see the phenomenon of people just being dropped off on the side of the road with no idea how to get to their next step, no idea really how to navigate. I mean, as one of our colleagues said during a panel discussion, imagine, and you and I are both well-educated people. Imagine if you were dropped off at the border of China, and you were asking for asylum, and they gave you this form in Chinese, and you don't speak Chinese, and they told you this is what's going to happen in Chinese. And just imagine having to navigate all that, and now imagine having to do that without a secondary or college education. We're putting people at a huge disadvantage. So that began happening in Del Rio. And what was amazing was the way that community, a small little town that, their relationship to the border was not based upon this phenomenon. Their relationship to the border was a very different relationship. And yet they came together, a Wesley nurse helped to organize it, and a couple of people from the city council, and they got all the component parts they needed to get in consultation with the Immigration Welcome Coalition in San Antonio, and they just put together a comprehensive, and the same thing happened in Eagle Pass. They've got a church there that's kind of, it's a smaller scale, but it's doing the same sacred work. And so being able to go and be witness to those things and say, we'll do everything we can, but as my removal defense attorney said when she first came on board, her goal was to see 50 clients in a year. And she said, oh, that'll be no problem. Do I have to win 50 cases? Because if I have to win 50 cases, I'll have to see, 500 or 1,000 clients. And I laid her fears and said, no, that winning is not the goal. Being an advocate on behalf of those who are being, mistreated, that's the goal. And we can't control the outcome because we know that the deck is stacked. And, that relieved some of her anxiety. But, all we can do, and the chance to do it in solidarity with so many extraordinary people who make so many sacrifices to be able to do something. We're not doing much, but it's an extraordinary effort, and it's an extraordinary, I think it's received with extraordinary gratitude by the people that we're trying to serve. And it really is, I used to be a hospital chaplain in a former life, and I used to say that there was something really sacred about being with a family in that kind of end of life situation. It just brought a lot of hope and a lot of consolation. And in a very similar way, as families are being ruptured by the policies of our government and by the practices of our law enforcement, we are just inspired by their ability to somehow maintain their dignity and maintain their hope, and by all the people that are coming in response to that. Do I wish it was more? Do I wish all the churches would close their tabernacles and come and surround all the detention centers and do active resistance? Absolutely, but it's enough to see who's involved now and to be a part of that, and to be a witness to that.
All right. Well, appreciate that moment of hope. Anything else you can think of for the good of the conversation that folks really need to know?
Let's see. If anybody is interested in the, we're still trying to get it situated, the immigration court observation, but I'd be happy to speak with anybody. I would send people to our website, but it's under construction, and hopefully it will come out a much more useful tool. But if people want to contact me, my email address is executivedirector@sarjfon.org if they have an interest in that type of witness activity, and maybe could help us to navigate some of the opportunities to coordinate that. That would be really great.
All right. I was going to give you an opportunity. You kind of took it, but anything else you'd like to shamelessly plug for?
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. No, I jumped right at it. Obviously, if anybody is interested in helping who are actively pursued in removal proceedings, One really important way is to make sure that they have legal representation. And so giving to an organization that's providing those services pro bono, San Antonio Region Justice for Our Neighbors is one of those organizations, but other J-Funds, Catholic Charities, RISIS, American Gateways, all of these organizations need more because capacity is the big challenge that we're all facing. And so we could do extraordinary things. We're actually, let me say one more thing. We're working on some fund that would allow us to, how shall I put it? Everybody's entitled to a lawyer. Nobody's guaranteed a lawyer in immigration court. So you can have a lawyer if you can afford to provide a lawyer. And so what we're looking to do, there aren't enough immigration lawyers to meet that capacity. So one thing that we're working on is some type of a fund that would allow all of the nonprofit practitioners to access, a certain fee per type of case, but also allow us to then invite attorneys who want to do something but maybe don't have the ability to do it pro bono. This would be a low bono service, and then we would offer mentoring so that they would feel comfortable in an area of law that might not be their specialty, because it's a very complicated area of law. And so that's to be developed, but I wanted to plant the seed for people that want to be involved in creating a fund that would allow us to increase legal service capacity across not just Texas, but across the country.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate the important work that you are doing each and every day. Know that our thoughts and prayers are certainly with you, and we'll look forward to seeing you down in South Texas for the Courts and Ports Advocacy Intensive at the end of this month. If folks want more information on that, they can go to texasimpact.org or email me at scott@texasimpact.org. But certainly thankful for the time today. I appreciate the work you're doing each and every day. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks again, Matt.
Thanks, Scott. Have a great day.